Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast. This show is an exploration of ideas, resources, business, and careers, all through the lens of someone who has served in the military. We talk to entrepreneurs, film producers, authors, and executives to distill the learnings that help you make better decisions, think more clearly, and make more money. I'm your host, Brock Briggs, and today I'm speaking with Olivia Nunn. Olivia is a former Army officer who has previously hosted the Army Soldier for Life podcast and now currently the Military Officers Association podcast. We talk through why your most important mission should be to figure out your calling, how the military responded to Black Lives Matter and how they should have responded, and the three most important elements of a successful transition out of service. Go leave your rating for the show, and while you're doing that, please enjoy this conversation with Olivia Nunn. One of the things that I'm always curious to get to know people really quickly is figure out what drives them, what lights your fire, so to speak.
For me, I think I'm an extra introvert, as crazy as that sounds. So I draw my energy from people, and I love being around people. I'm a people watcher. I love being able to figure out why people do what they do. And I think for me, it's why I'm a people pleaser. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with my culture. I am Korean American, first generation, and I'm the oldest. And early on, I've always been told that I have to lead by example. It's important that everything that I do, I have to be really good at. And that's very cultural. That's the position that I hold in the family. And if you know anything about Korean culture, you're expected to do well. You're expected to do well in academics. You're expected to do well in everything. And that goes back to how we place family. And the reason why it's all about family honor, you are a representation of not only yourself, but you are a representation of your family. And I think that was a natural fit for me to go into the military. And it's about being part of something bigger and better, being part of a purpose that isn't of myself. And that for me is what drives me. I never knew how long that service was going to be for me when I joined the military. It ended up being a 20-year ride. And now that it's over, how do I still give back to that collective whole? And that's why I'm still tapped into that military community.
It's very easy to kind of walk away from the military if you want to when you're finally exited. And it's kind of a strange sensation because your whole life is just overcome with every bit of your life is dictated by the military, what you eat, where you live, everything. And then all of a sudden, one day it's just not and it's almost difficult to even find those things again. If you don't have a spouse that's serving, or you kind of move back home to maybe a non-military town, you have your experience, but it's very kind of a distant thing and almost doesn't even feel real. So I'm curious, have you maybe struggled with that, that missing sense of higher purpose, and that's what led you to wanting to be plugged in with the military community after getting out, or what has been the driver of that?
I don't think so in that aspect, because like I said, I grew up being Korean American, and I always joke that I think fitting into the military lifestyle was very easy for me. My mom ran our house, and she was very regimented, very strict. So I thought joining the military was a joke in a way, right? Because to me, I was like, dude, if you could survive my mom, you can survive the military, right? My mom was very set on rules. I also have to say, as a disclaimer, my dad was in the Army. And so that's part of the reason why there was service My dad was enlisted. He was a combat engineer. I'm the oldest of 3 girls, and I'm daddy's little girl. And I knew since the age of 4 that I wanted to be in the Army, and because that's what daddy did, and that's what I wanted to do. But what did it mean to be in the Army and what I was going to do in the Army? I had no clue. However, I I knew about following rules. That was built into my DNA, right? It was always about obedience, and it was always about following structure. So that was easy for me. So it was there before the military, and leaving the military, that wasn't necessarily a hard part for me. For me, what I struggled with was the loss of identity. For 20 years, I've been some part of a rank, right? It was, before I was married, my last name was McNeilis. So it was, a rank McNeilis, and then it was a rank Nunn. And that uniform had accolades and a given structure. And oh, by the way, it opened doors, and it had some way of identifying you, and it also gave you some sense of power, right? People could look at you and it could identify you in a way of, oh, I know your ability and capability based on what branch you were from and what rank you were carrying. And when you don't have that anymore, and you're just walking in with a dress or a suit or jeans, you're just another person. And when you're also a minority woman, and oh, by the way, you're only 5'1", you just kind of bleed into the background. And that, I think, was the hardest part for me in this past year of transitioning from the military, is that how do I now find myself when for so long my identity was wrapped into that uniform? That has been the hardest part for me.
At any point, have you ever second guessed staying in for that long?
I don't think I ever second guessed staying in for that long. And I think the reason why is I got some really great advice at the very beginning of my career. I was a platoon leader. That was my first assignment. I completely lucked out. I was a chemical officer for the first 10 years of my life. And the second 10, I was a public affairs officer. And my first assignment as a platoon leader, I was a reconnaissance Fox platoon leader. And my captain said, "Hey, Olivia, you stay in as long as it's fun. And the moment that it's no longer fun, see yourself out." And while there were moments of my career that it wasn't fun, right? Who says that deployments is fun, right? There are moments that it can be fun, obviously. But for the most part, I loved what I did. And I think it goes back to, there is a relationship, there is a tribe that is forged under fire. It cannot be replicated anywhere else. And the people that you work with, the people that you meet, regardless of branch, you can't find it anywhere else. And I think even on your shittiest day, you just know that this is the place to be. What you're doing and the collective part that you're a part of is the best place to be. And I just knew that this is what I loved doing. And I think when it was no longer fun, it was around 16, 17 years. And you don't get out at that point. At that point, you're riding it out for retirement.
I think that that's the better framing for whether the military ought to be a career or not. And it's interesting that if people were in a different compare, like somebody with 4 or 5 years in the service to somebody that had been at a job for 4 or 5 years, for some reason, the way that they're framing what the rest of their career looks like is extremely different. Because the question to the person that's in the service is, everybody, are you going to make it a career? Are you going to do 20? Are you going to retire? And they're not really thinking about, is this fun? And then the person that's working in a normal traditional job, the second that's not fun, they're going to go find another job. And they're not worried about that. But for some reason that question weighs pretty heavily. And I don't think that the framing is the same for somebody of maybe a similar age and has a certain amount of years invested in it.
I think the other part is we, the military, we don't do a good job in storytelling and shaping it and teaching our youth when they first join that the military is actually a doorway called opportunity. And regardless if you stay in for 3 years or 20 years, you're going to come through that doorway a changed person. And everything that you acquire when you walk through that door is going to shape you to be a better person on the other side. And we don't teach that at all. We just, I think, focus so much on the mission that we fail to highlight what those changed perspectives are. I think all we point out is that here's the mission, and then on the backside, you can go to college. That's amazing. Don't get me wrong. And I think that is something we should highlight. But I think what we should highlight is we're going to give you soft set of skills. We're going to teach you leadership. We're going to teach you how to mentor, build, and develop. We're going to teach you how to be someone that other people will be able to look up to. We're going to teach you how to work with people from all walks of life, from everything from social, economic, ethnic, race, political, religious backgrounds, and none of that matters. And we're going to get it done, right? Whatever that mission is, and you're going to be able to get it done. And those skills, those soft skills, matter so much when you come out on the other side. And that's what employers are looking for. But we don't really preach those things at all. And the reason why I bring that up is my last job in the Army was U.S. Army Soldier for Life, which was in the business of transitioning our service members. And those soft set of skills become so important on the backside. And I think that's what we've got to get into the mindset of teaching our service members. Hey, whether your game set is 3 years or 20 years, those are the skills you're going to learn. And if you choose to take the route of going to college and that's why you came in, you're still going to gain those sets plus an education. If you want to go straight into employment, we've got you, right? Oh, by the way, if college isn't your thing and you want to go into trade school, we've got a path for you as well. And something I want to highlight on the trade school route, I think, micro, dirty jobs, highlights as well. It takes years to build somebody with the skill set. Let's use, a masonry, right? A bricklayer. To build something beautiful like a house takes time and takes skill. That's not something you pick up overnight, just like you don't create a sergeant overnight, right? It takes time, it takes years to get someone with that skill set. Same holds true. And so you don't have to necessarily go to college, but you got to go to trade school to learn that. And right now, America needs those skill set, and they're making a lot of money. And so I submit to our young men and women that are listening to this, if you want a way to get to that other side, think of the military as a doorway of opportunity. Serve our nation. You're going to be able to do some cool things. You're going to have the chance to see the world, be part of a collective tribe that you cannot replicate anywhere else. And then you're going to come through the door of opportunity, and you're going to do something great for yourself and be able to give back.
I think you highlighted some really great things there. And I am in complete agreement on getting out of the service and having these very great skills that we can take into another job. And I don't think that anybody would disagree with that. Why do you think that transitioning to a traditional job after service is so difficult for people?
It's a very complex conversation. You've got mental health, you've got that loss of identity. Here's the thing, 0.45% of the nation serves in any one branch of service. And we have 6 right now that we've got Space Force. And let's round it up to make the math easy. So 1%. 99% of America's population isn't connected to the military. And then because, I was Army, I can talk about the Army. When you look at the Army, majority of the Army's installation is in the South. And oh, by the way, when you look at the South, they're in the south of the middle of nowhere, America. So they're not anywhere near America's population centers. So who are they really conversing with or talking to or located near? So majority of America, they have no idea what the military is all about. In fact, 50% of Americans know anything about the military. They don't know what we do. They don't know who we are. And the only thing that they know about the military is what they see in Hollywood or on the news. And if you follow the news, it's all about bad news. And then at Hollywood, of course, Hollywood is going to make it seem all sexy and pretty. And, it's the guy that's kicking down the door. They don't see, like I said, those soft skills, the things that the majority of the military, right? For every guy that's kicking down the door, there's 10 guys behind or gals behind that individual. Now, all those combat support and service support positions to be able to make that mission go. And it takes every single one of those positions to be able to make mission happen. And they don't understand the complexity to that. Oh, by the way, now how do you take what we've been doing, all these complex jobs that we've been doing that doesn't necessarily translate to the civilian job markets, right? How do you take, I was a tank driver. Well, there's no tanks in the civilian market. How do you take, an infantryman or an infantrywoman or a mortarman? How do you take any one of those jobs and translate those skills? You can, it just takes time. But then at the same time, let's add some more complexity to that. We are an interesting, unique breed, the military is, right? We have seen some things, we have done some things. We live an interesting lifestyle. We get up at the crack of dawn, we go do some PT, we live a certain lifestyle, we're on the go all the time. We have a unique vernacular. Sometimes it's filled with a lot of colorful four-letter words. We're just different. And then we kind of try to go back to a different lifestyle, and not everyone necessarily gets us all the time. And depending on when we've served and where we've served, we've got some scars that come with that. And not all of our service are visible wounds, right? A lot of us have invisible wounds of trauma, and we have to be able to deal with that. And I think a lot of our civilian counterparts don't necessarily see that. So they look at a veteran, they're like, well, you're fine because you don't have a missing limb. So you must be okay, not realizing that many of us can be triggered. And we're trying to blend back into society. We're trying to go back to normal, but what is normal? How do you translate what we've done? Oh, by the way, because of our lifestyle, many of us, have probably gone through a divorce or two. There's just a lot of complex layers to trying to go back to something that we once knew. And then here's the other part. Some of us may not be going back to where we came from, right? Some of us maybe came from the Midwest, and because of the military, they're going to settle maybe on the East Coast. And now you're not near family or something like that. So there's a lot of complex layers to that, and here's the other thing. I think there's a misnomer to civilians saying, well, I always like to use this one because it's the very simple one to paint the picture of, well, you're a truck driver in the Army. Why don't you be a truck driver in the civilian life? Well, if they wanted to be a truck driver in the civilian, they would have probably stayed in the military and continued on being a truck driver. They want to do something different. And so it's, again, translating what they've done in the military, upscaling, rescaling their skills, and doing something different. And then at the same time, it's the heart and the mind getting that kind of changed and moved into a different direction and moving them back into civilian life. And at the same time, how do you go back into society, and how do you merge back into society when you've done something different? When you don't necessarily speak the same vernacular and they don't necessarily understand you.
Over 20 years as an officer in the Army, I'm sure that you coached or gave advice to a countless amount of junior troops getting out, maybe speaking from some of your own personal experience, but probably more likely kind of shots in the dark, just because you're in and you're like giving advice to somebody on kind of a process that you haven't done yet. How was your transition experience different than the advice that you had been giving for that time?
For me, because, obviously I wasn't going through it. My focus when I was, a troop commander or a senior officer, when I was doing that, my focus at that point was, what is your plan? That was always what I was looking at is, okay,
the famous question.
Come talk to me when you got a plan. In fact, when I was a troop commander, I would always have soldiers like, hey, ma'am, I'm going to get out. And I'm like, okay, what's your plan? And I would 99% of the time I'd get the deer in the headlight look. I'm like, I ain't signing your papers. When you got a plan, then we're going to talk. And I mean, my troops would get so ticked off at me. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'm a little biased because I do love them. I love the Army. And at this point, I know I'm going to stay in until retirement, and I just crested the 10-year mark. But here's the thing. I'm doing you a favor, because what I can see, because the Army also taught me to be an effective lethal planner. And so I know how to see long range planning, right? Kind of peek into the future. And this is what I see for you, is that you haven't done any planning. You can't tell me what you're going to do. You just kind of, I don't know, I'm just going to sit around on my butt. Is that you're going to end up complaining, and then you're going to talk trash about the military. You're going to do some dumb things. And then what? Right? You're probably going to get into some drugs, some alcohol. You might maybe re-enlist again, or you're just going to be sucking down some support systems, maybe not. And then what? Because you have no plan. And the only thing you're going to do is just talk trash about the Army. And to me, I couldn't see that as an answer. And yes, I was jaded because I do love the Army. And to me, I'm like, I couldn't see that as the way. I don't want you to lie about the Army. We're all going to have good stories and bad stories, but I want you to leave the Army with a plan, so that when you share stories about the Army, both the good and the bad, you are coming from a better place. So I want you to have an exit plan. And if you don't have an exit plan, then I, as your leader, am doing you a disservice, because that is my job, to make sure you have a plan. So come to me with a plan. If you don't have a plan, I'm not signing your paper, like point blank. And a lot of my soldiers fought me on that. And they're just like, you should just be proud to get rid of me. I'm like, no, I wouldn't be. I'm not proud to get rid of you. I would want to keep you. I would want to keep you to make you Sergeant Major of the Army. That is my goal. But if your intent is to get out, I will back you on that. But you've got to have a plan, a viable plan, whether that's college or employment. Of course, I will always push you to college. I'm a firm believer of higher education. However, give me a plan. And if you need help to build a plan, then tell me you need help and I will help build a plan with you. But you got to have a plan. So for me, it was always, that was the way for me in helping them exit the military. And at the time when I was a troop commander, it was 2008 to 2010. It didn't exist, this, Soldier for Life, because that wasn't born until 2012. But for me, it was, let's build your exit plan. Let's clearly define what was out there and how you're going to get out of the military. Because I want you to look back and say, I loved what I did. And I've got good things to say about the Army, even though there were shitty moments of it and it was in combat. But I loved what I did.
Can you maybe talk through what your plan was for exit, not necessarily anybody that you led, but what your personal plan was and like how that came to fruition, either played out how you thought it was or thought it would, or maybe not so much.
Yeah. So originally the plan was I am now divorced, but originally at the time, I was married. I was dual military. I was married to another Army officer, and we have 2 children. And the plan was he was going to build a company, and I was going to work for potentially a nonprofit. And the life was he was going to build this amazing multi-million-dollar company, and I was going to work for a nonprofit and be fulfilled with doing something that I was passionate about, and you know be more present for our kids, and just live this life and do a lot of travel, and just that was the vision, right? And what we're on track for that. And unfortunately, we went through an unexpected divorce, both of us. And we had been together for 20 years, married for 16, but together for 20 years. We had met each other when we were brand new second lieutenants at our first duty assignment at Fort Hood. So we grew up together in our young adult life, our whole military career. He's an amazing man, an amazing father, and we co-parent and we get along great. We're good friends. But for both of us, it's just the magic of our marriage had just fallen apart as our career was coming to an end. And, when you go through a divorce at the same time that you are transitioning out of the military, so that's a divorce to the Army and an actual divorce in your marriage, and you're not ready for that. For me, that found me shattered and broken. And I went through my own mental health crisis. And that was not what I had planned. And for me, that found me in a very dark place, and that had me planning my suicide. And I did not fully understand mental health or suicide in a way that I thought I ever would. It was a concept to me that was so vague and so misunderstood by me up until that point. And it took me down a very dark road, and because of family and because of friends, and because I faith is very important. I spent a lot of time praying, a lot of Bible study, fighting a war on my knees, and counseling, some very strategic calls that happened by some strategic friends of mine. I'm here today.
I appreciate you sharing that. I understand that that's incredibly vulnerable, and I have a ton of respect for that. So thank you. I think that you just highlighted how a lot of times our plan doesn't really come out or play out like we think it might. It's one thing to have a plan, but the nature of kind of what happens in the service, and certainly, like as you just shared, getting out of the service may not go exactly how you think. What do you think? You just highlighted like your friends and all of these other things were beneficial to you. What kinds of contingencies do you think that we need to have in place to backstop when our plan doesn't really come to play out like we think?
The military teaches us courses of action, right? You have a course of action 1, you have a course of action 2, and you have a course of action 3. And you would think that me being a lethal planner, that I had multiple courses of action, and I didn't. I put all my eggs in one basket thinking that this was going to be my life. And I think at the same time, like, I don't think that you don't plan for not realizing that's not going to be your plan, because no one thinks that you're going to go through a divorce. I think for me, it's what I would focus on is that just be prepared for what you think you're going to do is what you need to have courses of action, right? I thought I was going to go work in the nonprofit world. That didn't happen. I ended up becoming a government contractor. In fact, I remember clearly telling people, I'm never going to be a GS employee, and I'm never going to be a government contractor. What did Olivia become? I became a government contractor. And I think here's the thing. And I heard this in U.S. Army Soldier for Life. Like I said, that was my last job in the Army, right? We are in the business of transitioning service members. So I knew that job. Like I knew how to transition service members. Like I should be a pro at this. Here's what we heard time and time again is that you have to have a tribe, right? Like I said, the military in itself is a tribe, but you've got to have a tribe waiting for you. And I talk about this all the time. And we say this in Soldier for Life. 24 months previous to your exit out of the military, whether that's an ETS or retirement, you need to start your transition. You need to go to TAP, you need to go early, and you need to go often. It's not a one-time thing because there's so much information at TAP that you're going to miss it. And that's why they recommend you to go a few times. And if you're married, your spouse should go. Spouses are allowed to go because there's some good information for your spouse, because your spouse is part of your military life, right? Like they've been there for you and they should be part of that exit strategy as well. But there's a lot to take in. And here's the thing. You've been so accustomed to the Army or the Marines or the Navy, the military as a whole, telling you when you're going to move, right? Here's your PCS. Here's your next PCS. Here's your next assignment. This is what you're going to do. This is where you're going to go. This is now the time for you to decide where you're going to end. Are you going to stay? Like let's say Fort Hood's your last assignment. Are you going to stay in the Killeen, Texas area? Or are you going to go back to Ohio because that's where you're from? These are the choices that you now get to make. And that's the choice that either you as the individual, because you're single, or you as a family are now going to make. And that's going to be based on opportunity, jobs. Maybe it could be because of the weather, right? Maybe because you're just like, I'm done with the snow and I like the heat, right? Whatever those choices are, it is now you get to call those shots. But make those shots because you're making those researched choice decisions. And the other part is there's a lot that goes into that. The other part that you need to be prepared for is you need to start building your network. I talk about this. I am a communication specialist. I am all over social media. I teach social media authenticity, building your network. You can't build your network the day you're exiting the military. You've got to build that network long before. Your network is your net worth. What do I mean by that? You may not be into social media, but you have to have a social media presence, because if you don't, somebody else will have your presence, right? They're going to own you. You don't have to have every single platform out there. That's not what I'm saying, right? You don't need to go open TikTok and Twitter and Facebook. Okay. If you're uncomfortable with social media, have at least one platform. And that platform is LinkedIn. I don't get paid by them. I'm not advertising for them. But if you don't have any social media, the one I recommend is LinkedIn. And here's why. It is a business platform. It is going to be the platform that's going to assist in helping you develop your network, especially because it's going to help you develop your network as you exit the military. And that's why I'm telling you to use LinkedIn. And again, you shouldn't be doing it the day that you're exiting, or even just 3 weeks before you're exiting. You should start developing that network long before you're exiting so that you can find your tribe. The second part of finding your tribe is, and this goes back to the earlier part of our conversation, is trying to give back or to be connected. There are 55,000 nonprofit organizations that are somehow connected to the military community. I guarantee you, one of those 55,000 nonprofits is probably going to be your type or your cup of tea, or maybe your cup of joe. So find one of those that somehow resonates with you. It could be maybe Team Red, White, and Blue because you're out into running or something like that. And so you get with your local chapter and you hang out with those types of people. Or maybe you're, the type of person that when disaster strikes and you're going to be the person that's going to grab your Jeep and get out there and do cleanup or something. That's Team Rubicon. Or I don't know, you're into something else. I guarantee you there is some kind of organization that fits your personality, your persona, that you just want to be around others that get you. Find them, find that type of tribe of veterans, seek them out, become friends with them, because those days that you wonder why you left the military, when the other people that you work with don't get you because they never served, that's when these groups of people, you're going to lean on them. And that's why it matters to have that tribe.
LinkedIn really gets a bad rap, and I understand why. And I used to be part of the cohort of people that used to kind of shit on it for a variety of reasons. There is a lot of value to be had there, though. And I think that from a professionalism standpoint, that is a place where you can aggregate people to you very easily. And that, like you said, that's what you need when you're getting out. You need people that are in jobs, and that's kind of what people go on the platform for. There is all these other platforms, and you kind of got to understand the purpose of why that platform exists. If you're on Instagram, it's, hey, like, look at this traveling I'm doing. These are, funny videos. TikTok kind of in that same thing. Twitter is kind of like in its own realm, but there is only one reason why people go on LinkedIn, and it's for connecting with other people in a professional capacity. And it's just something that you got to do. I mean, you don't have to do it, but you're missing something if you aren't doing that. I wish that I had been getting what you're saying, like, prior to getting out. I said this on a past episode before, but talking about going through the TAP class, like you set up your LinkedIn profile in the class. But one of the huge drop-off points that, looking back on, I realized was kind of a failure that I experienced in the classes. There wasn't any drive to actually connect with the people in the class. Like, that should have been a layup idea to, like, hey, add every single person in this class to your network right now, because you guys are all in the same cohort of people that are getting out, and see how you can benefit and kind of help each other. Everybody on LinkedIn is generally willing to kind of help. And I don't think that there's a ton of, like, rudeness on the platform that there exists on some of the others.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. Most people in the military community are willing to give a hand, right? For the most part, I do try to get back to people that have reached out and asked me a question. Sometimes it just takes me time. I have like over 11,000 connections. It just takes me time sometimes to kind of wade through some of the questions. And, I do try to respond. And here's the thing, if I don't know the answer, I do try to find someone within my network that may have the answer, because transition's hard. And, it's not easy to go from living a life in uniform to now no longer living a life in uniform. It's different. And if I can help you move from transitioning from uniform to civilian life, I'll try that. I'll definitely try to help you with that.
You spent a huge portion of your career in the Army, and kind of like what you do now professionally, being responsible for communication, whether that be through marketing or social or what have you. What do you think that we as individuals get wrong about communication, either interpersonally or through social media or any channel for that matter?
I think we all stink at communicating, but even communicators, I think, just stink at communicating. And I think the biggest reason is because we're afraid to be vulnerable, right? I think we get so wrapped around the axle of trying to say what is the most politically correct thing, instead of just saying, this is how I feel and what I think. And at the same time, respecting the fact that this is what I think and feel. And I think our culture has gotten to the point where we're so quick to cancel everybody out. Well, you think like that? You feel like that? Well, I don't, so I'm going to cancel you out, which I think is horrible. And that's why I'm so big on authenticity. And one of the things I really like about being out of the uniform now is that I like to say things and being able to punch back a little bit more. Whereas when I was in uniform, I was a little restrained and I have to say things in a certain way because, it isn't Olivia Nunn's opinion. It wasn't Lieutenant Colonel Olivia Nunn's opinion. It was, I'm representing the United States Army. And there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. One of the things as a PAO for the Army, I was one of those PAOs that did get told to be quiet quite often because I did punch a little hard as a PAO. And I think one of the things is, I think as anyone who uses any platform to communicate, I think the questions we got to ask ourselves is, when you choose to communicate, whether through language or photos or videos, if they are true to yourself, always be true to yourself, but you should be true to yourself without hurting somebody. There's no room to be hurtful or negative to someone else. There's no room for being racist or prejudiced or sexist. Here's the truth. We're not always going to get along, and we can respectfully disagree, but we should give grace to each other. And I think that is where we get it wrong, is that everyone thinks that we have to agree with each other. No, we don't. We don't have to agree, but we have to give each other grace when we disagree. And I think that's what we need to teach each other, especially to our children, right? Especially as we raise the next generation to be leaders. And I think that's what we keep seeing play out in politics. And I think that's what media loves to dig into, is these disagreements, is my opinion is better and more right than yours. No, it's not. It isn't. You have every right to believe in what you have the right to believe in, and so do I. And we can disagree to that. And I think the other part is, we're so afraid to show our vulnerability and have a discussion about it. And I think that impacts our ability to have a real discussion when it comes to race, and a real discussion when it comes to mental health. And we're seeing that being played out in the military. We're starting to have that conversation about mental health and about leaders taking the time out to go address their mental health. It's taken time. We're finally doing it. I just wish that we could do it faster, because it's impacting our readiness. And we're asking the same families over and over to raise their right hand, right? We're having generation after generation from the same family serve, and we can't do that, right? I said earlier, less than 1% serve, 99% is disconnected. And if you ask today's recruits, 80% of today's recruits said that they had a positive conversation about joining the service, and clapping our hands, yay. But let's peel back that 80%. 80% of them had a positive conversation with a family member. So we can't be congratulating ourselves. That means generation after generation of the same families are serving. We haven't had the draft since Vietnam. We can't keep having an all-volunteer force with the same families. We've got to change that. And we can only do that if we have open conversation, open dialogue, and we have storytelling. And it can't be communicators always having storytelling time. It goes back to everyone sharing their stories, right?
You said that as a PAO, you were kind of put down for maybe being too punchy. Can you tell me about a time that maybe that happened? I would love to hear like a specific instance, if you can share about one of those times of maybe dishing out something that you shouldn't have.
I think it's always, like it's always been about when I would write or suggested about how we should do some messaging or communications about anything, right? My suggestion about, I don't think we should write it this way, or I recommend that we shouldn't have a conversation about this, especially when it came to race or to religion. And I'd always get that look of like, Olivia, you need to stop. You need to be quiet and sit down. And I would just throw up my hand and I would just sit down, and I would just get frustrated with that. And they're like, no, but this is the way we always do it. And I'm like, exactly. This is the way we'd always do it. And where is that getting us? And one particular time where I got really frustrated is Black Lives Matter. I got really animated about how the conversation was, we're going to have senior leaders talk about race, and we're going to do safe stand down, and senior leaders need to, go down to the troops and talk about it and have this real conversation. And I remember just like rolling my eyes, and they're like, why are you doing that? I'm like, really? that's not happening. They're like, no, we're going to make sure it's happening. Like, they have to check the block that they did it. I'm like, yeah, that's not happening. That they're just checking the block. And
How would you have suggested they enforce it? I mean, this is like 06 is probably that we're talking about at a certain level. You probably have to assume that they're doing what's being asked of them, right? Like
down there and making sure. And I said, okay, you could do all you want to make sure that it's happening. I said, but we're not equipping them to have real conversation. I said, here's the truth. Majority of the officer force is white male. The majority of the enlisted force is male African Americans. So have we given our leaders the ability to have a conversation? Like, have we taught our leaders how to have a conversation?
So what does that look like? What do you think? I'm assuming that you're implying that we haven't done that. So in your opinion, I guess, what would that look like? How could we better equip?
They're like, well, we give them vignettes. And I'm like, okay. And I looked at these vignettes and I'm like, uh-huh. And I said, here's the problem with vignettes. They make it appear as if we're just reading them. They're not heartfelt. And that's the problem. When we don't allow real conversation to happen, and when our soldiers don't feel like their leaders really care from here, then it means nothing, right? Then it's just a check the block. Soldiers know that, right? Soldiers know when you're doing something to check the block. And that's what I was driving at. And I think where my anger came from is we're checking the block because it's the race. We're checking the block because it's the sex thing that we're doing. Check the block because of gender, right? And I'm just like, I'm just so tired of this BS. Also, I think at the same time, as a PAO, I put up a post on LinkedIn at that time. I've always, in all of my posts, even as Olivia Nunn, right? I was always careful about what I posted on social media, knowing that I represented the Army, right? Even though I knew that I would put disclaimer, like, this is my post only. But, I know that people looked at my post knowing that, oh, Olivia is a Army PAO. And I think I finally I got really tired because, my ex-husband is African American. So my children are mixed. And I think I finally just got tired and I got sick of it all. And I live in Alexandria, Virginia, just on the other side of DC, where change can really happen, right? Where the nation's capital is really just on the other side. And I think just something snapped in me. And I just was tired of talk. And I put up a post and I was like, let me be clear. I opened it up and said, let me be clear. Black Lives Matter. I've never once had taken a stance on any controversy, on any topic, on anything. I've always just kind of just let things slide or just kind of just go on or just whatever news has happened as a PAO, right? I just always kind of played the rules as a PAO of whatever's going on, you just kind of let it go. And I was just like, I'm done. And I put up a picture of at that time, my husband and my kids. I said, let me be clear that Black Lives Matter. And here's why. As a wife to a Black man, as a mother to Black children, here's why. And yes, I'm in the Army. And I just went down the list. And I took that same anger and that same sentiment and I punched it back to the Army in that conversation. Like, if you as leaders don't have that anger about the formation in front of you, about the soldiers in your formation, then why are you a leader? And then after Black Lives Matter, we rolled right into Stop Asian Hate, right? So we went from Black Lives Matter, which directly affected this house, and then right into Stop Asian Hate, which now that directly affects this house yet again, right? That's me. And then, oh, by the way, that's my children too. And that's my grandmother and my mother, right? In that family in LA that's been directly affected by that violence. And I'm like, and what are we doing? What are we talking about? Nothing. And I'm just like, I'm so like, we're having, what are we doing? Nothing.
So what, in your opinion, do you think would have been the better response? Or kind of implying that there wasn't a response, or if there was, it was mediocre or lackluster, what do you think that would have looked like
So
had you been in charge?
actually, believe it or not, I think the Air Force was probably the service that did it best, right? The senior leaders of Air Force came out and actually came out and said, we are addressing this. And not only are we doing it wrong, here's what we didn't do right. And here's why we've got to do it better. Right. And straight out talked about how we as a formation in the Air Force, we're not doing it right. And how we have not had this conversation and how we've got to do better and how we've got to look across our formation. And why are we not having this conversation? Right. They're very vulnerable about that. And they looked themselves in the eye and said, man, we suck at this and we got to do better. They owned up to that. I was like, that's how you do it. And they did it right away. The Army, what did they do? They sat on it for 2 or 3 weeks. And then they finally were like, yeah, we're going to have a safe stand down day. We're going to tell our leaders to do this. And I'm like, again, it was that cookie cutter message of our condolences to that. I'm like, this isn't the time to do a cookie cutter message. This is a time to own up to the fact that we have systemic racial problems in our country. And it isn't going to go away. You don't put your head in the sand and go, hear no evil, speak no evil, talk no evil. This is real. And this is very real for our soldiers. They live this, they feel it, they know it. And so we can either pretend or we could say, this is happening. And as a leader, how do I better understand you? And what can I do as a leader to better understand you? Because I will never know what it's like to walk a mile in your shoe, but help me to understand a little bit more.
Practice a lot of that empathy. That's a very hard thing to teach. If it's kind of, I don't want to say it's you either have it or you don't, but it certainly seems that way when played out in practice.
And I think when you do that, then that gets after the core of taking care of your people. And I felt like we missed that mark in that component. In that conversation, we had missed the mark and we could have done so much better. And then there was definitely no conversation on Stop Asian Hate. And then when you talk about diversity as a whole, see yourself, it's hard, especially when you say see yourself from diversity and from gender, right? We talk about there's 18% in the military as women. And then as you climb the ranks, there's less and less women. And a huge part of that is childbearing. And then at the same time, we just don't make it to the top. A lot of it is, Army speaking, right? To make it up to the chief of staff, they want combat arms. Well, not until 2016, women weren't allowed to be combat arms. So maybe in, 20 years from now, that'll change, right? Maybe we will have a chief of staff that will be a woman because we're going to be able to grow the ranks of a combat arms general that, came from there as a woman. And that would be amazing to see. But it's being able to see yourself, and it's seeing yourself in the way you look too, right? And that's been hard for me when I'm biracial. I'm 3/4 Korean and 1/4 English. How many biracial people run around in the military? There's not very many. In fact, I grew up being not enough, always being told I was too Korean on one side and then, too white on the other. So that's hard. So I think, race is a very important part of the conversation. And I think for me, it's something that's always been in the back of my head as a storyteller, as a communicator, is that you can't run away from that topic. I don't think that's a topic you have all the time. I think, when you do have that, you turn people off, but it is an important part of the conversation and you can't play, dumb and blind to it.
What do you think your time in the Army fighting some of the battles that you just described through racial issues, sex issues, etc. What do you think that's taught you about the pace of change, both within a military organization and then maybe on the outside? I think one of the things I get frustrated with is speaking with people that are looking for change. And I think that most people are in agreement on, but understanding that the pace of change is much slower than we would like it to be. It's hard to just snap your fingers and people instantly think and feel and act differently. That doesn't happen. And whether that's right or wrong, we could talk about all day, but it just doesn't happen that way. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on how quickly things can or can't change.
I agree. I wish things could happen at a much faster pace, but I am excited that things are changing, right? Things are changing at a pace much faster than, when I was younger. Like I look at how things are different now for my children than it was for me. My kids see themselves in this area. My kids have no idea about that not enough that I experienced. My kids go to school where there are other half Black, half Korean kids, so they don't feel different or look different. And I'm excited for them. Like I said, 2016, the doors open. Women can do just about anything. You want to be a Navy SEAL, you want to be Ranger, you want to be Special Forces, all of that is open to women, and I think that's amazing. At the same time, we still have a long way to go, right? Roe versus Wade that ignited the news, right? About the conversation about women and their body and who can control that conversation. It blows my mind that policies that dictate what I can and cannot do to my body as a woman is still controlled by a man. This is 2022. And yet I can't, as a woman, control the choices to my body. And that's not even, and I get that is not an easy cut conversation, right? Like I know part of that is political, part of it is religious when it comes to, the conception of life and all of that. Like, that's not what I'm trying to get into. I'm just, at the heart of it is the choice of my body and the choice to control what happens to my body, right? It blows my mind that I don't even get to make that choice as a woman. And that is just one example. There are other examples when it comes to medical choices for women that, oddly enough, men still control. So it's slow to turn in many ways, but at the same time, it's happening. And we're having these conversations. I wish that, there are many times I snap our finger and it could happen, but we're getting there. I think the important part of this conversation, and I'm a huge advocate for this, is that in order to have change, is that women must be present where the change is happening, where the decision to make that change. They are 50% of that equation. And as such, men must remain at that table because they are the other 50% of that equation. You can't exclude men from that decision making, because if not, then we're right back to square one of just women being at the table and no men, right? And then we get nowhere. So I'm a staunch supporter of it is men and women together, coming together to find solutions to the problem and working together as a team and being a team in solving any type of problem. And that's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be a team, solving all kinds of problems, whether it be health problems, health crises. Right now we've got real world problems, right? Not just problems in America, but worldly problems. We've got food shortages, we've got water shortages, how things that I think as a world that we need to band together to have conversations about. And I would love to be able to figure that out as a team. But we got to get baby steps together done right.
I was listening to a conversation that you had on the Soldier for Life podcast, and John, I think his name is, was talking about how he was not really privy to some of the issues that women face in the military generally. And it took him a long time to kind of come to terms and understand what that was like. And that resonated so hard with me because, and I've said it multiple times in several past episodes, but I had no understanding of some of the systemic challenges that women face in the military until I was seeing somebody that was in the service. And just hearing some of those issues secondhand, it's maddening. And like, not only is it frustrating from like hey, you're my partner, like I'm concerned for just your general well-being, but like, hey, this is an organization that I was a part of, and like you are deliberately getting treatment that is just outright not equitable, like not even coming from any just like basic equity. It's not there in a lot of places, and it makes me sad in a lot of ways, like I said, both from the partner perspective, but also at the organizational level too.
I'm glad that you brought that up. And I think so it takes both sides, right? And what do I mean by that? I think the first part is the courage to talk about it, right? I talked about on a past episode on Soldier for Life that I was assaulted. I was a first lieutenant during a deployment, and I was assaulted by my platoon sergeant, right? And I internalized that message for a very long time, and I hid it and I buried it. A lot of it was a protection for myself. It wreaked havoc on my mental health for a long time. There are times that I could talk about it and I'm very unemotional. It's just very factual when I talk about it. And there are other times that it breaks me down because this was my teammate, right? This is the person that I trusted. This is the person that I thought would be there for me, right? To have my six. But yet he's the one that assaulted me. On the same notion, it's a learning lesson for men, right? And I talk about that for my leadership, because when it was all said and done, when that investigation was done, it was kind of turned back to me of, well, Olivia, what do you want to do? Right? The investigation kind of came back and it was just kind of a stalemate. What do you want to do? And I use that as a lesson of, it should have never been my decision, because wrong was wrong. The decision should have been removed from me, and it should have been the full extent of UCMJ should have gone after him. And that should have been removed from me. And my leadership should have said, we're going after him and we're going to stand behind you. Because I was a young first lieutenant and I was a woman, and I just wasn't emotionally, I just didn't know. I was broken emotionally. I had internalized a lot. I was ashamed. I thought I had done something wrong, just a lot, right? I thought I was unworthy. And so I use that as a teaching tool that, no, the leadership should have stood by me and should have said, we're going to stand by you. We're removing that decision because you did nothing wrong. The extent of UCMJ is coming after him, and we're going to do this for you. The second part of that is, as men, right? If you see something and you know it's wrong, that you're that voice and you are that champion, and you stand up and you say, absolutely, fuck no, you don't do that, right? Because that's how you change the culture. It's that you allow this, well, boys are going to be boys, guys are going to be guys, and you just keep doing it instead of saying, no, we're going to break this cycle. That is inappropriate. We shouldn't be doing this. This isn't the way I like it. And I feel like most men, I've learned over the years when I share my story or when I have conversations, is that actually most men are actually uncomfortable too. They are like you. They're like, man, I'm so astounded that women are being treated like this, or that this is appalling, but they are uncomfortable and they just don't say anything. And so the right thing is to stand up and say, hey, we're not going to do this. That was inappropriate. We're not going to allow that type of culture to happen. We're not going to allow that type of rudeness. And if you're going to be that type of guy that's going to do that, you can see yourself out the door. Because usually it just takes one guy to do that and it stops.
Yeah, I think the problem is twofold there. It's like, one, it's an awareness thing. And then two, it's acting on that when you notice something. Like I said, I worked with women in like a very minor role. There just like wasn't a lot of females in my MOS or rating in the Navy. And without having started to see somebody that was in the service, I don't know that I ever would have realized it. And that's like, it just is crazy eye-opening. And so I think that needs to be there, but then also you need to be able to follow up with what you just said, being able to kind of set the tone. You are what you allow, really.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to talk about what you are doing now. You do a couple of different things. You host a podcast, and I'd love to kind of hear how running a podcast has maybe influenced the way you communicate. Talk a little bit about the show, what you guys are doing, and maybe where people can find it.
I used to host the Soldier for Life podcast series when I was on active duty, and I did that from 2019 to 2021. And when I exited the Army, I started hosting a podcast series for MOAA, which stands for the Military Officers Association of America. And we just launched season 3. And you can find that wherever you pick up your podcast series. So iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. And season 3 is stories from the war front, from Iraq and Afghanistan. And some of them are Silver Star recipients. And in fact, the season 3 opens up with a pilot, Doug England. And in fact, we won an award, a Marcom Award. It's a communications award, a gold award for his story. And his story is about the Osama bin Laden raid. And really, to highlight that podcast series, it's really about the Never Stop Serving series. And for those that don't know about MOAA, while MOAA says that it's, the Military Officers Association, it's more than just for officers. They are a nonprofit advocacy organization. They're an organization that is all about the military community. They're a lobbying organization, and they advocate for our military. Everything from burn pits, right? They did an extensive work with that, keeping us updated about changing COLA rates. Everything from what does healthcare mean for us, and the changes in that. They are an organization when you are in active duty and you can't go to Congress and say, what's wrong with this? Why can't we do this? MOAA is going to be that organization that can advocate for us and actually do something about it and make those changes for us. I am a MOAA Life member, so that's one of the reasons for a plug. But also, I do their podcast. But I just love the fact that MOAA has given me the ability to podcast for them and be able to talk about stories and about topics that really matter to the military community in a way that I wasn't able to in uniform, right? That, like I said earlier, to be able to punch a little harder. And it's just a great community to be able to have these conversations in a way that is going to make a difference, from mental health to advocacy in a way that's policy driven. And so I just really encourage, your listeners to check it out. Like I said, you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. It's called the Never Stop Serving podcast series.
I've listened to a handful of episodes, and they're very good. And you bring up some interesting stories and conversations, which I think are valuable. For some reason, I found podcasts sort of towards the last year that I was in the service, and really never stumbled across any military podcasts, but there is certainly no shortage of them now. There is quite a few of them, and each has kind of its own interesting, unique take.
Right. And then on a personal note, like I'm in the works. I had announced it earlier in the year and I had some setbacks, but I'm trying to develop my own podcast series with my partner. It's funny when you talk about transition earlier, right? You have all these great ideas and then you realize you kind of have to take a step back to kind of recenter, recollect what you're trying to do, because you realize that the path that you're on isn't necessarily the path that you're going to be on. But I'm in the process of trying to develop out a podcast series with my partner, and it's Calm in the Storm, the Unexpected. And it's with my partner. He, retired earlier this year. He did 26 years, 20 of it with special operations, and he retired as a sergeant major. And, like I said, I retired with 20 years and as a lieutenant colonel. And so, the point of the podcast is, we come from two different parts of the Army. And not only two different parts, I'm conventional, he's special operations, he was enlisted, I was officer, I'm that planner, he's a fly by the seat, he's very, happy go lucky, and, and I'm very structured and planned, and, he tends to be jokey and I'm like very serious. So it's just like all these opposites of so many different ways. And just, how can we bring this, these different personalities to play and have these conversations? And by the way, we both are minorities, right? He's Black and Puerto Rican, I'm Korean and English, and we both have been divorced, we have children. And how do we talk about life from a lived minority experience in the military, with all these different opposites, and talk about these experiences, right? And provide that lens and have some fun conversations, but at the same time have these real conversations about these topics, because they do matter. Being able to have these authentic conversations, like I said.
You've spent several years and like have a ton of experience in the podcasting space generally. What have you come to learn, or what have you identified are some unique trends in this space? Maybe what you've found is successful or not, and maybe why podcasting is a good thing. It seems like I still talk to so many people that don't know what that is, but that's weird coming from somebody that is in the space, one, like doing podcasts, but that's all I listen to as well. I barely even listen to music anymore.
Yeah, so actually I taught a class at Dinfos. I was invited to give a podcast speech. So podcast is one of those rare mediums where the more niche you can get, the more popular or successful you can be, because people are going to want to dial into what they want to hear, because podcast gives listeners the ability to control what they want to listen to. Podcast gives the listener the ability to stop, start, repeat, come back to at their time, right? It isn't like live TV where you have to be intently listening to what it is. And if you miss that key component, you're kind of screwed. Whereas with podcasts, it's like, wait a minute, what did he say? She said, let me rewind and kind of go back. Or wait a minute, the kid's screaming in the background, let me pause and let me come back. You could take podcast on the road. You could do it while you're washing dishes. You could do it while you're mowing the lawn or folding laundry, or studying or whatever. And so it allows you to be able to curate whatever it is that you want to listen to, everything from, crime scene type podcast to military to dating, whatever it is. And so I think that's why podcast is so popular, is that you really get to curate the things that you want to listen to. It's like music, right? So many of us have such a wide breadth of music listening genres that you could do that with podcast. And I think the other part is that because there is no one way to be right in podcast, that anything works, right? You've got your 7-minute series podcast to everything to the Joe Rogan gold standard, right? Everybody wants to be Joe Rogan, but only one can be Joe Rogan. So I think, what works for your audience, right? So I think, people want to be able to switch it up. Sometimes, you just want to get in there and get a quick 7-minute listen, or maybe sometimes you want to come in and do a 40-minute session. I think whatever it is that if you want to get into podcasts, is define what it is that you want to do and who is your audience, which goes back to what I teach as a communication specialist, is who is your audience, by defining your audience, and then curate from there. And once you know how to identify that, then you're going to be successful. And like I said, in the world of podcasts, the more niche you can be, the more successful you're going to be.
I think that's one of the unique things about just the internet in general, and whatever platform you use, social media wise or medium wise, you want to start very, very narrow. And it's weird how it kind of can grow larger than that. Like, you think you're kind of limiting yourself by staying too focused, but you kind of need to get good at one specific area first before you can grow and kind of branch out and try and do new things. Because if you can't nail that first bit, then the bigger bit is going to be much harder.
Podcasting's fun. I enjoy doing it. So
what kind of advice do you think you have for people that are maybe freshly out, transitioned, even active still, and maybe starting to develop their presence online? Do you think that, maybe not even just from a podcasting sense, but do you think that people ought to take the same approach to just social media, choosing who that they're going to speak to and just try and target that small group?
Well, I think, I talked a little bit at the beginning is one, create a presence, right? You've got to start networking, developing your network, because network is your net worth. But at the same time, your presence is your brand, right? Develop your brand. And that's everything from get a headshot. This past weekend, I did a fireside chat for career development, career seminar that Jesse and John put together. It was a free event for the military. They're probably going to do another one in the spring, but them and other military organizations do put together events all the time. Just be on the lookout. And that's the other reason why you should be on LinkedIn, because there are organizations that put out free events for the military. But invest in a good headshot. John Meadows is a headshot photographer. Go invest in a package. I would highly recommend seeking out his services and paying for a good headshot. And here's why. You want to put your best face forward, because this is a representation of you. And also, a lot of times when you're applying for jobs, a lot of times they're going to ask for your photo, right? And you're probably want to put your face on your Zoom call, right? When your face pops up. And I always say that you should get an annual headshot because your weight fluctuates. And so you need a headshot, you need to do a resume. A lot of times you're going to put your photo on the resume. There's a lot of things that you need to do to start preparing, and you don't want to wait until the last minute, because you can always update those things as you move along. And the other part is you want to develop that network and your brand of who you are, right? Your brand should give a sense of who you are without you talking, if that makes sense, right? Someone should get a sense of who you are, of your digital presence, because you've been interacting, right? You have to give into the system as well as get from the system. What I mean by that is you have to partake. You need to post things. You need to also give, right? You need to like things. You need to comment on things. The reason why you got to do that, it's part of the algorithm, right? You need to come up on people's feeds. You don't need to go crazy on it, but you need to like a few things. You need to say, you need to comment on things. And that's how you develop and become aware on the network. And that's how people find you. Start looking at hashtags, right? Look at who the influencers are in that market. You don't need to go all crazy in one day, right? This is why it takes time. You've got to start cultivating that, which is why I harp on, at a minimum, you should be doing this 24 months out, because it takes time. Because what you don't want is that you don't want to give yourself anxiety of, oh my God, I only have 2 weeks and now you're trying to rush out the door and doing this, because again, transition is hard and you don't want to try to do this all at once, right? It's like that thing, right? You don't want to cram the night before the exam, right? Because now you're stressed out. You should be preparing for it all along the way.
All the best things in life benefit from compound interest. Money, relationships, your social network is certainly one of those things that falls into that category as well. I have one final question for you, Olivia. What is the thing that we can learn from you that we can implement today?
I would say the most important thing that I harp on is being your authentic self, right? Find you and be your authentic self. And what I mean by that is, when I went through my own mental health crisis and I had to, kind of be broken and go through all of that, I realized I had to find myself all over again. And the best advice is find that person, the person that you put away so long ago, right? That little boy, that little girl that you wanted to hide from everybody, right? The person that you were so afraid to show because you were so afraid that might be ridiculed, or that you thought that people would laugh at, right? It's that most vulnerable, but yet the most secured version of you, right? I think when you tap into that person, that's the person that you're going to be so free with. And when you find that person, you're going to be the most happiest. And when you're willing to be vulnerable and happy with that person, you're going to be in a better place. And I say that knowing that's not necessarily easy, it's going to take time, but that's where you have to get to in order to be able to find yourself when you've gotten yourself out of that uniform. Because for such a long time, that's the only thing you've ever known is rank and that uniform, right? For me, it was Lieutenant Colonel Nunn, right? I had to find who I was outside of that.
I agree completely. There is no reason that you can't be who you are in today's day and age. We need more weird people. We need people to be themselves and to lean into that wholeheartedly. Olivia, this was really fun. I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on.
No, thank you. I appreciate the chance to share.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.